Is it just you, or is Claude getting dumber? Once the gold standard for coding, it's now stumbling, churning out buggy code, becoming repetitive, and losing its train of thought mid-session. Today, we're diving deep into Claude's coding crisis. We found 3 culprits: a shift in reasoning effort, a hidden caching bug, and a controversial verbosity prompt. We're breaking down the exact timeline from March to April to show you how these separate issues created a perfect storm of performance drops. You'll see exactly when the bugs shipped and how it felt for the users. If you rely on AI to write code, you need to understand why these models fail. It's time to look at the data. Let's get into it.
So what happens when a tool you rely on every single day, an AI assistant that's supposed to be getting smarter, suddenly feels like it's getting dumber? That's the super frustrating reality a lot of developers faced recently with Anthropic's Claude. Let's dive right into what's being called the Claude coding crisis.
Right, so over the past month or so, this chorus of concern just kept getting louder and louder in developer communities. The feeling was pretty clear. Something was just off. Anthropic themselves even acknowledged it. Reports were flooding in that Claude's performance was seriously taking a nosedive.
It's a really frustrating and honestly kind of unnerving situation. You start to doubt the tool itself, you start second-guessing your own prompts, and you're just left wondering what in the world is going on behind the scenes. Well, today we're going to pull back that curtain and get to the bottom of this whole mystery.
Okay, so here's the scene. Developers, people who live and breathe code, started noticing their AI coding partner, Claude, was really slipping up. Tasks that used to be a piece of cake were suddenly a struggle. The AI just seemed less intelligent, not as helpful. And these reports were so serious that Anthropic had to launch a full-scale investigation.
And this is where the story gets really interesting. Turns out the problem wasn't some simple single bug. No, Anthropic's engineers dug in and found that the drop in performance was caused by a perfect storm of 3 separate and seemingly unrelated issues.
So let's put on our detective hats and take a look at each of these culprits, one by one. It's actually a fascinating peek into the incredibly complex balancing act of building and maintaining these huge language models.
The first problem wasn't really a bug in the way you might think. It was actually a deliberate product decision. A classic engineering trade-off that, looking back, was probably the wrong call. Okay, let's break down this idea of reasoning effort. The team was trying to fix a really annoying UI freeze that happened when Claude was thinking for too long. So they changed the default setting from high effort to medium effort. Now the goal was to speed things up, make it snappier. But the unintended side effect was a pretty noticeable drop in intelligence. It turned out that, users definitely preferred the smarter, even if sometimes slower, version of Claude.
Now for culprit number 2, this one was a more traditional software bug. And oh boy, did it have a frustrating effect. It basically made Claude seem like it had a terrible memory.
So here's what was supposed to happen. The team put in a caching optimization. The plan was simple. If you walked away from a chat and came back an hour later, it would clear some old data just once to speed things up for you. But a bug made it so it cleared that data on every single message after that first hour. The result? Claude would just forget the context of the conversation, getting super repetitive and losing its train of thought. It was literally like talking to someone with severe short-term memory loss.
And that brings us to our final culprit. This one is probably the most subtle of them all. It was just a simple change to the model's internal instructions, what's called a system prompt, and it was made to get ready for a new model release. Man, this really shows you how delicate these systems are. A single instruction was added to make the AI a little less chatty, but for complex coding tasks, that brevity came at a huge cost. By forcing the model to be so concise, it actually hurt its ability to reason through complex problems and spit out high-quality code.
So you're probably asking yourself, if there were 3 different issues, why was it so hard to find them? Well, it's because they didn't all happen at once. They were layered on top of each other, which made it a huge mess.
This timeline shows it perfectly. Look, the first change went live on March 4th. Then, the second one dropped on March 26th. Then, while the team is already trying to figure things out, the third issue got introduced on April 16th. This layering of problems created what Anthropic called a broad, inconsistent degradation. It wasn't one clear problem, it was this confusing, moving target that made finding the root cause a real challenge.
But they did crack the case. So let's talk about how they fixed the immediate problems and, maybe more importantly, what they're doing to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. And here is the satisfying conclusion. The reasoning effort was switched back to high, the caching bug was squashed, and that verbosity prompt was completely removed. By April 20th, all 3 of the culprits had been dealt with, and things were back on track.
Look, fixing the bugs is one thing, but the real takeaway here is about learning from your mistakes. And to that end, Anthropic has laid out a whole new playbook designed to make their systems way more resilient.
The big lesson here is really all about process. First, they're beefing up their dog fooding. That's where their own team uses the exact same public version of Claude so they can catch issues faster. They're also improving their code review tools, adding much stricter testing for system prompt changes, and rolling out big updates more gradually. And finally, they've committed to being a lot more open with public communication. And as a sign of goodwill, and to just acknowledge how disruptive this was, the company also reset the usage limits for all of its subscribers. It's a small but pretty important gesture, for sure.
This whole saga really leaves us with a critical question for the future of AI. As we start to rely more and more on these incredibly complex systems that can fail in totally unexpected ways, is this kind of radical transparency, breaking down exactly what went wrong and why, the new price of admission for earning our trust? Something to think about.